This is TWiT.
Last week we talked about Glenfiddich, and I brought it up because it's very much, hey, holiday season, like this is the one Scottish whiskey that's probably going to be there. But I've fallen into a rabbit hole here of you can't talk about Fiddick without also talking about Balvenie.
Oh, the Balvenie, yes.
Because it's William Grant. So, Grant built the Fiddick distillery outside of Dufton in the early 1880s. And as soon as it was up and running, they made their first production in 1887. He started working on another distillery almost right away. He originally called it Glen Gordon, literally next door, but eventually renamed it Balvenie after the Castle Balvenie that's like down the road from there, which is a ruin, and it has been a ruin for a long time. The original castle was built in the 1200s, so it makes it one of Scotland's oldest stone castles, and it went through the incredible times that were that era of Scotland. But the last time it was really inhabited was the early 1700s when William Duff committed suicide in it in 1718, and that is the Duffs of Dufton, like that's these people. So it's been, by the time William Grant was building on it, it had been deserted for almost 200 years. It was a ruin. Now, this is the 1900s, so most whiskeys were blends. The Balvenie really was making a blend, primarily the Grant's blend, as in William Grant. That Grant family makes a blend called Stand Fast, which is the family motto, Stand Fast. And that's what they primarily exported for decades. And in fact, you can still buy it today, although it's not sold in the US for some reason. I was checking because you get it here in Canada. Grant's blended whiskey is a popular product. It's a good little product. But remember that Glenfiddich, this was last week's story, started marketing single malts first. They were the first to really start selling single malts in the 60s. As a concept. So the blends have been doing well, so let's do a single malt. And so next door, Balvenie, owned by the same folk, they decided to release a single malt in 1973. I went looking for this to see if there was any 73 out there, and there have been a few 73 releases, old barrels found some, and then bottled like 30 to 50 years old. One of them is only $30,000 if you're looking for a Christmas present.
Wow. Oh boy.
But I mean, I've jumped a bit here, right? So they're up and running by the early 1900s. They get through Prohibition. Then they get by the 1970s when the blended whiskeys are starting to sell more poorly. They come up with this branding concept around single malt, which is a particular style that still uses a lot of the blending techniques where they take sets of barrels and they put them in a vat and that sort of marry the flavors up and then they bottle them. So by the 70s, Balvenie's not as big as Glenfiddich, but it is big. They've got 8 stills running. They're also very much a traditional style distillery, whereas they're doing their own maltings. They do their own copper works. They do their own woodwork, their own cooperage as well. And that's when the current master distiller, the guy named David Stewart, I've had the good pleasure to spend some time with over the years, various times in Balvenie, started at Balvenie. He is still there today. So a lot of the sense of what Balvenie's about comes from one man in the modern era, at least. And the whiskey I wanted to talk about today is the one of the first of this style of aging in bourbon casks and then finishing in a different kind of casking. That was very unusual. But in 1993, the first DoubleWoods were made. So they aged in what they called American oak. But what we know is bourbon casks. Why? Because bourbon casks are cheap, right? There's a lot of them and they taste good because the Americans will only use them once, typically for five or 6 years, and then they get rid of them. The Scots would buy them up. They would remake them in the cooperage into larger barrels. So they'd take 5 American oak bourbon barrels and make them into 4 hogsheads, normal size barrels for making whiskey. They would age 10 years in those bourbon casks, and then they'd take them out of those casks and put them into larger sherry punts for 2 years. That's what it means to be a DoubleWood, is that you've aged this whiskey while it's still a single malt and came from a particular malting. Not that it really means that anymore, but that's what the original intent was. Remember, it was really a marketing term, but it's been aged in 2 different kinds of wood. This is different from the way Fiddick did it, where they actually split the malt at the beginning of production, and they would put 90% in bourbon, 10% in port, and then marry them at the end in a vat. This is the same liquid being moved into different barrels along the way. And so this is now 30 years ago that they first started doing this, and it kicked off a style. They've now gone on, and if you go look at a Balvenie roster, you'll find the Caribbean cask, where they do their finishing in rum barrels, the Portwood casks, or the French oak casks, different ages and so forth to get to the flavors that they want, but all the same kind of technique. And I consider this another great place to bring someone into the single malt family, like a very approachable whiskey. It's got its own character to it. It's not incredibly expensive. And Balvenie's been stunningly successful with it. Well, they still make their blends to this day. That line, starting with the DoubleWood 12, has a dozen variants now. And they sell tons of it. Where they used to do their own maltings, they have to buy grain from all over these days because they're so huge. They're up to 11 stills and 12 washbacks in that facility in Dufton, right beside Glenfiddich. They are literally side by side, and yet their characters are very different. Same family, same locale, two different types of distilleries making very different products. You can find that DoubleWood 12 for about $70 retail. It'll often on sale for $10 or $20 less. 43 ABV, which is sort of the minimum for something that isn't chill filtered. And imminently drinkable. This is a straightforward, gentle, pleasant whiskey that tastes great every time.
The Balvenie DoubleWood, 12 years of age. And a classic. I mean, everybody knows this one.
It's a 30-year-old style of whiskey, and there's not a lot that can say that. It's been made continuously for 30 years now.
Very nice. A lovely holiday quaff.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.